All right, everyone, welcome to Backyard Farming. We're going to call this the Poultry Feed Series. Our speaker today is Dr. Jonathan Moyle. He is with the University of Maryland Extension as a poultry specialist.
All right, good morning, everybody. I guess I should say good afternoon. So Megan asked me just to talk today some basics. We're gonna go over some basic stuff about how we can keep our flock healthy. As you can see, that's kind of the title of the whole talk here. However, before we get started, because we are the University of Maryland and we are government paid, we need to go through a couple required slides. For example, this one here, if you want to read through, the university's programs are available to everybody. And they have a long list here of who all is available. But again, we do encourage everybody to attend, and we don't discriminate against anything that I'm aware of.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider.
I don't know if you heard that, but I guess it plays sound too. I did not know that because usually I give this presentation and it's quiet and so there's no sound. All right, the next one is, it's a quick disclaimer. I will use several websites or products or brands throughout this talk. That's not an endorsement. Those are just products or brands that I happen to have pictures of or I've seen or just something that we've used in the past. It's not really an endorsement. So again, with all of that said, we also want to say that if you do have an emergency problem for your animal, it's always best to start with a veterinarian. That is where you need to go. While we do know animal health, we know animals. We are not veterinarians, and so we will steer you towards those as much as possible. So with that said, let's just discuss some of the things about keeping our birds healthy. Excuse me. One of the best things we have to do is, everybody knows the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So one of the best things you can do is start off with good, healthy birds. Whether you buy those birds as babies or adults, it doesn't matter, but you always want to start with good birds. And along with that, we need to make sure that they're fed well. And like us, if our animals aren't fed well, we're not eating right, we're not as healthy as we should be. And that's the same as our birds. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We also want to talk about housing, and then the word no one wants to hear, which is biosecurity. And we'll go over that when we get to it. So again, start off with healthy birds. Purchase your chicks that are healthy. When you go there, get them from a reliable source, whether it's a feed store locally. When you're picking them up, look at them, check to see how they look. Are their eyes bright and clear? Are they fluffy? Do they look healthy? Check for pasty butts. Make sure that they don't have any paste on their vents, because that can indicate that they were chilled or something wasn't quite right before that point. And you also want to make sure that when you go there, you check that it's NPIP. Now, most of the feed stores in Maryland will all be the chicks they sell are all NPIP certified, because the state requires that for them to bring them in. However, if you order birds online, all the commercial hatcheries I've ever dealt with are NPIP, but you just want to check and make sure. NPIP stands for the National Poultry Improvement Program. And it means that those birds are tested and checked for disease, so that we know that you're getting a flock that's free of disease and clean when you start with. If you start with another source, say a neighbor or somebody else, you need to make sure that they can prove those birds are free of disease. And Maryland Department of Agriculture has a list of certified testers. There's a link right there that'll take you there, but you can look up Maryland Department of Ag, Animal Health, Poultry Testers, and it pulls up the list. Another thing to avoid is never, and we tell this to everybody, I know people still do, but never buy birds at a swap meet, or personally, I would never buy birds at an auction house or anything else, because whenever you do, you're not only getting those birds, you're getting any disease those birds were exposed to from all the other birds that were there as well. So again, those are places that you really want to avoid. You want to be careful if you buy from there. If you buy from a source you're not sure of, quarantine your birds for 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that they're healthy, that they don't have a disease. Because if we quarantine them off, at a distance from our other flock, we can make sure they're safe before we introduce them to our flock. Because again, we don't want to bring disease on. And one of the easiest ways to bring disease on is when we get our birds. And like I said, another very important thing is feeding the right ration. And the picture in the middle there kind of sums it up. That's just a picture, one side of an aisle in a feed store. There are hundreds of different things you can purchase and items you can get for your chickens. So you need to think about this and figure out what is the best way to feed your birds. What is it you're wanting to do? Do you want to be organic? Do you want to be non-GMO? Do you care? Do you just want to feed conventional? The other questions you need to ask yourself are, what age are your birds? Babies need more protein. Older birds don't need as much. So we need to determine what age your birds are. Are your birds laying? A layer is going to need a different ration than, say, a broiler. So again, we want to look at these different things and decide what we are going to do with these birds. Oh, one more quick thing. Another thing to consider as you do this is what type the feed is in. As you can see from the green bag, it says crumbles. A crumble is basically a pellet that's been broken, so it crumble. And a pellet and a crumble, whenever a chicken takes a bite or gets a mouthful of that feed, they're getting a full ration because it's all put together in one thing. Another form we sometimes see feed, not as often as we used to, is mash. And mash is where it's just a ground feed and the chicks can pick through and get what they want. So we often try to avoid a mash. I'm a big fan of crumbles. I like crumbles. Crumbles are what you want to start with out of babies. You don't want to use pellets on a baby because a baby can't consume the pellet. A little chick is not big enough. Layers, pellets work great if you want to go that route, or you can just stay with crumbles throughout the whole thing. So that's just talking about what form the feed is in. Then with other things we want to look at when we look at it is the protein level. And here on the right, you can see we have an example of a label. This is actually for a sporting bird starter. I didn't realize I didn't have any labels of regular starters or bird feeds. But anyway, if you look at it, you can see as we go through there, it says crude protein as a minimum of 28%. It has lysine and methionine, which are very important. Those are two of the limiting amino acids. So we want to make sure they're there. That's a good level. About 1.3, 1.4 is a good level of lysine, and usually the methionine is about half of the lysine. So again, we look at those things. Other things you can look at on there are like fiber, excuse me. We don't want a lot of fiber because chickens can't digest fiber. So again, as you buy your feed, look at the feed label, go over it and look and see what's there. It'll also show you your calcium and phosphorus and sodium and other things along those lines as well. And those are all very important. Again, this one here has a minimum and max for calcium. So again, this is important, and especially if you're looking for a layer feed, you want to check these. But if you're starting off with babies, say from 0 to 4 weeks of age, start off with something that's like a starter. It's an easy way to go to a store and buy a starter. A starter is going to have everything that made together in a ration for you. You don't have to worry about it. You're going to look for something in the 20 to 22% protein range. If you're growing like a broiler type bird, you really want to be in that 22% range because they're putting on muscle very fast. They need a lot of protein. Another thing you'll see is medicated feed. And typically, if we're looking at a medicated feed, that contains what we call a coccidiostat to help prevent coccidiosis, which is a nematode which gets intestines of the birds and can cause some issues. Coccidiostats work well. However, there is a withdrawal time. So you have to stop feeding medicated feed a certain amount of time before you can consume those birds. So again, we typically don't worry about it after the starter phase because as birds get bigger, they've been exposed to them and they can then withstand any challenges. It's kind of like us. We build up an immunity to those things. We do not feed medicated feed to waterfowl because it can cause adverse problems. They don't handle those medications well, so we don't feed them there. We also, after we fed that first, month or so, and again, I just tell people when the bag runs out, then change feeds. You don't have to say, oh, they're 4 weeks old, I need to change feed right now, because in reality, you could feed a starter feed through the whole life of the bird. The difference is those starter feeds are typically more expensive. And so we want to drop that protein down because that typically makes feeds a little bit less expensive. So after about a month, we're going to switch over to, say, a grower feed. And the grower has a little less protein. It's in the 16 to 18% range. And again, this is great for finishing out broilers or meat birds. And it's also good for growing pullets, which are, pre-layers. So we can keep the pullets on this up until the time they start to lay, at which time we're going to have to switch it to a layer diet just because, and I'll get to that in a minute, but basically we need the calcium and phosphorus. You don't actually have to switch, like I said, to a grower. If you're just raising a few birds for meat and one bag will carry you a long way, don't even worry about it. Just keep using that same bag. So like I said, we're going to switch to a layer feed when they start to lay. And the reason for this is again, we don't need a lot of protein. That 16% range is really good. However, we really do need to calcium, and we're going to look for a calcium content about 2.5 to 3.5%. Another thing we can also do is provide supplemental calcium. And we can do that, say, with oyster shell, given free choice. We can have oyster shell, we can put it in a container there. The birds will eat it as they need it. And so, again, it's just an easy way to make sure that they have that calcium that they need in order to develop that shell that goes on that egg. All these are important to keep your birds healthy, because if we don't have these there and they're short on calcium, they're going to be pulling it from their bones, which can result in injuries and other problems as well. We typically do not feed medicated feeds to laying hens. Part of that is they're older now. They should be able to withstand some coccidia and some of those challenges. But the other reason is, again, there are rules about feeding medicated feed and then consuming the eggs. You can't consume the eggs if you're giving them a medication, because as medication can then pass on to the egg, which then ends up in you. So again, we want to make sure that we follow any labels. If we use any kind of a medication on our birds at any stage in their life, we want to read the labels and understand what it is we can and can't do. For example, with layers, how long is it until I can start using those eggs? With broilers, how long is it until I can start consuming that meat? So again, we want to read those. Other things to remember is sometimes we're going to have to worm our birds if we get a worming issue. And again, that label will tell you how long you have to keep from using the eggs and meat. One thing we always hear everybody talk about a lot is, can I give table scraps to my chickens? And the answer is absolutely yes. Like peelings. Now, when I say peelings, be very careful with potato peelings that are green. Green potato peelings can actually cause, they're poisonous. So just don't do potato peelings if you're kind of scared of that. But yeah, green ones are bad. Stale bread, the bread gets a little stale. You don't want to use it. It's great for your chickens, a little high in salt, but other than that, it's fine. It won't hurt them at all. But one of my favorite ones we used when I grew up was all the leafy greens. You're chopping up your vegetables and all that. You've always got those pieces on the side and on the end that you're not going to use. Those are great for your chickens. They love them. They're going to consume them, and it's a very good source of, well, entertainment for them, for one thing, but two, it's good for the vitamins. There's vitamins in those leafy greens. But when you do this, remember that the total supplementation of table scraps, or if you give scratch grains, should not do more than about 20 minutes. They should consume it all up really quickly. 20 minutes, I think, is a little long. I'd say 10 minutes. But again, shouldn't be more than about 10% of what they totally consume. You don't want to give them too much. If you look here, you see a pumpkin. These chickens are eating on a pumpkin. Shoot, just chop the pumpkin, throw it in there. They'll eat on it. That's not going to disrupt their diet enough that they're going to consume it to the extent they don't eat. But again, it's a way to get rid of some of the pumpkins after Halloween and Thanksgiving that we have everywhere. And again, easy way to get rid of them. And the birds really do enjoy eating the seeds out of there. That's the first thing. If you notice, the seeds are almost all gone, and they'll get to the flesh eventually. Treats. We hear people talk about giving birds their treats all the time. There are thousands of kinds of treats. I can't remember. As a kid, there was no chicken treats. Now I go to the store, they're everywhere. Again, use them sparingly. Use them as a treat. Maybe 10% of the total intake tops. Because again, it's like giving your kids donuts sometimes. A donut here, a donut there is not bad, but if that's all they're eating, that can become a problem. So again, when you look at it, there's lots of different kinds. Let's see, what we have, some dried mealworms with oregano. So we see a lot of things. We're seeing a lot of essential oils being used in poultry now, and kind of as a preventative of disease and things. And again, I was surprised at how many different things are out there. I do want to say one more thing real quick while we're talking about treats and supplemental feeding. In the wintertime, if it's really cold or you're going to have a really cold night, it's often really good to give them some whole grains right before they go to bed, because they'll take time to digest that down, like some corn or a little bit of mixed grains or something. By giving them that right before they go to bed, that's going to fill them up, and it's going to digest overnight. And while they're digesting that creates heat, and that will help them stay warm and supplement their heat throughout the night. So during the winter, I'm a huge fan of giving chickens, like I buy deer corn, I'll be honest, is what I've done in the past. Just go out and buy some deer corn, give them a few handfuls in the evening. They've got something in their crop. They're going to be digested at night. It helps them get through those cold winter nights a lot better. But while we're talking about feed, one of the most important feed ingredients that we often always overlook, and that is water. Water needs to be clean. I tell everybody, no matter where I go, don't give chickens water you wouldn't drink. Now, granted, once you give it to them, I wouldn't drink it, but they're kind of messy. But again, you want to use the same water source that you use to water your chickens. The other thing we need to do is clean waters regularly. In other words, don't let them grow moldy, moss, other things. Make sure we clean them out, dump all the dirt out. The type of water you use can depend on a lot of different things. Again, here's a picture of a water bowl. Looks like the dogs chewed on this a little bit, but this is a great kind for the winter time because it's going to freeze, so she can dump them out. It's actually my daughter's, so I'll tell you that. But she dumps it out every, a couple times a day and takes fresh water out there during the winter time because it freezes so that those birds have fresh water. And she likes this type of a bowl because it's flexible. That one's 20 years old. I think it's older than her. And again, it makes it's simple for her to change the water. So again, clean water, remember that's one of the most important things. They will consume twice as much water as they do feed. So when you look at it, having that clean source of water is a very important thing. So another thing we want to do to keep our birds healthy is provide proper housing. And I often get the question of, what's the perfect chicken house? Well, there is no such thing as a perfect chicken house, in my opinion. There's a lot of perfect chicken houses. Basically, it all depends on what you have. A chicken house has to do a few different things. One, it needs to protect from the environment. In other words, it needs to keep the birds out of the rain, out of the wind. It needs to give them shade during those hot summer days. That's pretty simple. I mean, it doesn't have to be elaborate. Can be, but it doesn't have to be. It also needs to have a place for food and water. We want to keep that food and water separate so that wild birds and animals aren't consuming it because that's a way to spread disease. So we want to keep it separated from the wildlife. It also needs to have nests where the birds can lay their eggs, what makes it easy for you to collect, where they can stay clean and we can find them. But also, I'm going to say this, it's not on the list, and I've probably thought about it afterwards, but I think it needs to be said. Birds need a perch. They like to get up off the ground. It helps their feet. It helps them to feel good, and it also keeps their feet cleaner. And at night, they love to get up together, and you'll see pictures of them huddled together on a perch together to stay warm. Even in the summertime, for some reason, they still pack together. So again, it's kind of a natural thing that they want to do. So perches are an important part of every house. When you look at where you're going to build your chicken house, location is the most important thing. Like all real estate, location, location, location. You want to avoid flooded areas. If you put it down in an area which floods, your chickens are going to get wet all the time. It's going to cause sickness. It's going to spread disease. Just like us, they want to stay in a dry environment. Then there's a lot of other things you need to consider, zoning rules, laws, HOAs, all that stuff. But you want to set it back from your property. You don't want to put it right up next to your neighbors. That's just not going to go well. At the same time, you don't want to put it right underneath your bedroom window either. So you want to look for a location which is away from everything and everybody where they're not going to cause any kind of issues. Other things to consider is how are you going to water your birds? Can you get a hose there? You're going to have to carry water in a bucket. How are you going to water your birds? So as you're looking where you're going to put your chickens, you might want to consider that. Another consideration is electricity. Do you have electricity out where your birds are at? It's nice because then you can put a light out there and keep them laying throughout the winter much better. You can also put a heater under your water so your water doesn't freeze, so you don't have to haul water out there 2 or 3 times a day during the winter when it's frozen. So these are things you really want to consider as you're determining the location of your chicken house. There's a couple different types. We've talked about this before. There's movable houses that you move to a location around your yard. You see a move, we call them chicken tractors, hoop houses. There's a lot of different names. Or you can use a fixed one where everything is a fixed location. They're stuck there. That's where they are. But sometimes you'll see those where they have let them out in this pasture today, that pasture tomorrow, so they have regular rotations, but most just have a fixed area that their birds can go into. Here's kind of some pictures of different types of movable houses. There's an endless array of them. The top ones are more small. The top 3 are more of the small flock type thing. You get down these bigger ones down below. These are more of a larger type, semi-commercial type situation. Again, we have fixed houses. This was my daughter's. She just had a small house, nice little run where the birds can go out. And again, if you look in the run, you can see there's a place to perch and a little ramp and stuff they can run up and down. I'm a big fan of giving chickens, what do you call that? Entertainment? No, what do you call the structures where they entertain? But anyway, give them something to do. It's just an interesting way to go. They can run, they can play, they can hide from each other. It just gives them a way to be healthy and happy. But as we start looking at what we're going to do with our birds, one of the things that's very important to remember is we don't want to put too many birds in one area. So there are some rules on maximum density. We don't want to get, even when they're little babies, more than about 4 per square foot. And then as they get older, we give them more and more space. You know, by the time they're a month old, we've got 1 bird per square foot. And by the time they're adults, then we're down to maximum 1 bird per every 2 square feet. You know, and again, more is always better. And if we have outdoors, we don't really want to let the birds go outside until they're fully feathered, because they can't really protect themselves either from direct sunlight or cold or anything else. But once they start to get those feathers, then we can start letting them outside, and they can play in the sunshine. And especially in the springtime, it's always fun to let them out and watch them run around when they're little babies, learning what from the world. Another thing to remember about your chicken shack, coop, whatever we want to call them, when you build them, provide lots of windows. However, in the wintertime, if you don't have fancy windows that open and close, windows can be a problem where they let in the wind that can blow on your birds. So here's an example of a young lady. She has nice windows to let the sun in, and the sun, but at the same time, in the wintertime, the wind and the snow can blow in. So she's recycling feed sacks, it looks like here, and stapled them up over those holes. It's clear enough, it's still going to let the light in. However, it's going to block that rain. It's going to block the wind from getting on those birds. It's not so tight that no air is coming in, but again, it's going to prevent that direct blowing of air on the birds. So we've talked a lot of ways about preventing disease, but I want to talk a little bit more about ways we can prevent disease. As you see here, we have a sick bird. This isn't anything we all want to find. None of us want to go out to our shack and find I call it a chicken shack, a chicken house, coop, whatever you want to call it, and find sick birds. So again, this is something we need to be aware of. What can we do to prevent that? But I'm going to digress a little bit and talk a little bit about what's going on. As you all know, we do have what we call hyliopathic avian influenza running around in our country. And everybody keeps thinking, you know, we hear a lot about it in the commercial industry, but we don't hear a lot about it in the small flock. And if we look, it's been about 50-50. About half the flocks that we've seen have been commercial, about half have been small flock. And that may be an underestimation on the small flock, in my opinion, because a lot of times disease goes unreported there. They don't tell the authorities, so it's not recorded. However, as we look at this disease, it is getting everybody. Now, this is the latest information from the USDA. I actually downloaded it this morning, and it updated while we've been speaking. So it's not technically the latest, but this is as good as I could get before the presentation started. As you can see, in the last 30 days, we've had 26 flocks, exactly half and half, backyard versus commercial. And that's actually going down. If we look, it was going up for a while. As you can see the numbers down below, we see that in November, we had 42 farms, backyard flocks, 33 in December, 13 in January, and now we're to February. So that's actually a good trend. We like to see that going down. That could be a couple reasons for it. A lot of this is associated with the birds as they migrate. So if you have a lot of waterfowl near your house, it's best to keep your birds isolated. Don't let them get out where the waterfowl can make them sick. If we look at where it is around the country, well, for the last 30 days, it's been kind of sporadic. It's been both sides, in the middle. It's not been really consistent on where it is. However, we see California had the most, followed by Maine and South Carolina. So we see those coasts tend to be hit pretty hard. A better picture is this one here, and this is showing where it has happened in small flocks for the duration of this outbreak. As you can see, it's everywhere. The only states that don't report it are Louisiana and West Virginia. I kind of wonder if hasn't been there, they just didn't catch it. And it's not easy to always catch small flocks. Some people, when their birds get sick, they die, they just bury them and don't say anything. So it very well could have been there. We just haven't noticed it. But again, this is an important disease. No matter where you are, it can become a problem for you. So what do we look for when we start talking about avian influenza? Because this is something that if your birds do get sick, if you do get a respiratory disease, you do need to all the states out here have a local hotline that you can call the animal health department, and they will actually test for respiratory disease if you're losing animals to it. So what you want to look for is a sudden high mortality. If you come out today and your birds are fine and you come back tonight and they're all dead, that is going to be something that you really do need to report, because that's going to be something that's fast. That would be something like our highly pathic avian influenza. Other things, they become lethargic, they have a poor appetite. When we start seeing diseases in animals, especially in the commercial industry, one of the things we watch is our water intake. Because as soon as birds stop drinking a lot or the normal amount, if we see a drop in the water, we know that there's a disease coming. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. It's kind of like our kids. You notice when our kids aren't feeling well, they stop eating and drinking. So that's why we want to keep an eye on this in our animals as well. You're going to watch for respiratory distress, such as sneezing, gasping, coughing. Look for mucus coming out or swollen faces. These are all things that you'll start to notice. And when you start seeing these, it's time to be concerned. You also see a drop in egg production. Sometimes if it's very mild, you won't see much other than all of a sudden the eggs aren't coming in. But that's kind of hard to tell at this time of year, because this is a natural time. Well, they should be starting to lay now. They should have already stopped laying, start coming back in lay here shortly. The other thing you'll see is wattles that are purple. The combs are purple and the legs aren't the right color. And that's because of the lack of oxygen. When we start to see that bluish purple color on those combs, that means they're not getting the oxygen they need. So that means there's a respiratory issue as well. So these are things you all want to look for. If you start to see these, check with your animal health department. There's a hotline for all the states that you can then call up and report to them and tell them what's going on, what numbers, and they'll determine if they need to send a person out to check your birds or not. So how can we prevent this disease from coming around? Well, first is there's a few different things, but we want to isolate our birds. We want to keep them in a controlled environment. We want to keep them away from other birds. Like I said earlier, we don't want wild birds drinking out of our waters with our chickens, because if the wild birds are drinking out of it, their saliva is in there, our chickens are drinking out of it, we've just shared disease. So we want to prevent that. The same goes with the feed. We want to keep them out of our feed. We want to keep others away. People. Sometimes people are some of the biggest spreaders of disease out there. The first time we had avian influenza go through in 2014, not the first time, but the last time was 2014-15, we saw that about 80% of the disease was spread by people. And we've done a much better job at stopping that spread during this outbreak. We're seeing the vast majority this time is because of wild birds or environmental reasons that is getting on the farm. Another thing we want to do is, if you have multiple age birds, if you have different flocks and things, keep them separate. And always start with your youngest birds, take care of them first, then go to your oldest birds. That way you're not taking a disease from the old ones to the young ones. You want to control the traffic of who comes on and off your farm. If you have birds, make sure you know where people are coming. If your neighbor comes over and you know they don't have any animals, they're probably going to be fine around your chickens. But if your neighbor comes over and they have a flock, well, if they come over and visit your flock, now you're swapping diseases back and forth. So again, you need to think about that and be very careful about how you do it. You also want to sanitize, disinfect equipment. If people are going to enter your farm, make sure you covered up their shoes. Make sure you clean them up, clean your feet, hands. All these things are very important as we try and stop the spread of disease. One of the things, if you notice, if you remember back from that picture of my daughter's farm, she had a sign on the wall, telling people this is stop. This is an area I don't want people around. And that's an important thing you can do. So keep unnecessary people off your farm and out of your poultry houses. Now, I say that with a caveat. I also think small flocks are one of the best ways we can educate people about chickens. So you need to be careful on how you do it, is what I would really say. We keep doors locked, fences locked, gates, signs, all these things can help. But again, don't give away if you still want to do education, that's okay, but maybe you don't let them in with the birds. Maybe you have a run where the birds are in the run and the people can watch them through the run. Those are things you can do to help prevent your birds and keep them safe, while at the same time educational opportunities. Signs. I like this sign here. It's kind of a funny situation. This sign is on a fence next to a county fairgrounds. And this person, if you look in the background, it's hard to tell, but there's chickens, there's goats, and all this other stuff that they have. Well, I'm standing in the parking lot at the fairgrounds, and people would see his animals. They'd climb over the fence and go over there and look at them. put a sign up, didn't change anything, but people now don't climb over the fence. They stay back. They're respecting that person's animals. They see that it's not part of the county fair. They don't go over and bother them anymore. So that simply putting up a sign can actually do a great job of helping keep people away. You want to detour wildlife. I hate to say it, there's a lot of wildlife out there. One of the fun things I've done throughout my career is put out game cameras on farms. People say, "Oh, nothing's going on my farm." You'd be surprised how many birds we've seen go in and out of houses. Here we have a picture of a raccoon at night. He showed up. Guess what? Raccoons spread disease. They can have several different types of diseases. So again, we don't want them in with our birds, not only because they can eat them, which they probably will, but because they can also spread disease. So use fences to prevent entry. Again, cameras, they're fun. When you put a fence around your birds, you can see the fence here that he's walking around. That fence is actually buried down into the ground so that he can't dig under it. When you go down and then go over kind of an L. So if they dig into a corner, and it stops them from getting into where your birds are at. Other things we want to do is dedicated footwear. If somebody's coming over that isn't part of your farm, have them put on shoe covers. You can see the young lady in the picture here. She's taking care of a friend's farm. Since those aren't her farms, she's putting on shoe covers so that she doesn't spread disease when she's there taking care of her friend's animals. She's letting them out for the day. Again, important things like that. It's simple, but again, it's something that we need to do. I'm a huge fan of dedicated footwear. These are the shoes that go out to my birds. They don't go anywhere else. They can be an older pair, doesn't matter, but those shoes go to and from the birds. And then if I go to town, I'm in a different pair of shoes so that I'm not bringing something back from town and going into my birds. Keep protective clothing on hand. Disposable clothing, like I said, the shoes, things like that are just simple. Keep them on hand in case someone needs to see your birds. The other thing is stay away from other farms. I love this picture. Here we are at a local gas station. That scares me. Look at all the manure and the feathers out of the back of that truck. And you're going to have that happen. I was in a meeting the other day where people were complaining about biosecurity. There was no way to wash their shoes. And I asked, there's a couple hundred growers in the audience, asked them how many of them had been to Walmart. Well, almost every one of them raised their hand. So if you all went to Walmart without a foot bath and you all can go other places, the thing you need to remember, though, is when you go home, change your shoes. You don't know who was there. This is especially true of feed stores because if you think about it, who are the people that go to feed stores and buy chicken feed? Same people that have chickens. So when you go to those places, wear your go-to-town shoes that are clean, and when you come home, don't take them down to the farm. Change your shoes. You want to avoid visiting other farms. You want to avoid, going around wild birds. You want to, if there's a park nearby that's full of ducks and geese, if you go down there, think about all the disease you're going to be exposed to that you can then bring back to your farm if you go there. If you're a hunter, remember, you need to clean and change clothes after you get done hunting before you go back around your birds. If you do go to a location frequented by other growers, wash your clothes, wash your hands, change your clothes before going to your birds. And that's just one of the simple things we talk about all the time. There's a list of things. This is something that we share with all our people. You can print this out if you want. Limit visitors on your farm, minimize foot traffic, avoid contact with wild and other domestic waterfowl or fowl. It's particularly waterfowl. A lot of diseases are spread by waterfowl that they're immune to, but will kill your chickens. Avoid sharing farm equipment, have dedicated farm shoes. Ensure that all visitors are disinfected or they wear new shoes or shoe covers when they come to your house. Make sure your feed and water sources are covered and free from contaminants and not where they can be actively fed on by wild animals and pests. We want to keep pests down as well. Rodents can be another source of disease, so we want to make sure we have a good rodent control program. Put up signs. And again, use the best practices you have to prevent wildlife from getting around your animals. One more thing I want to mention real quick is clean your cell phone. This is something we talk a lot with our commercial growers because how many of us have cell phones? Well, pretty near every one of us. Where do they go with us? Everywhere. When was the last time you cleaned your phone? Think about that. I mean, if you how many times you touched it, shake hands with somebody, where you've been, and think of all that, and then think it's time to clean your phone. But when you do, make sure you take it apart. Take the case apart, clean inside, underneath, around, wipe it off really good. Again, let it sit on there. It'll be wet. Let that wet sit there and dry, because that's time with there. The longer it's wet and sitting there, that's more the time the chemical has to kill the bacteria that are on there. One last thing I want to share with you is there's been kind of a myth going around, and this has got really big up a little bit north of us, and it actually made it in the newspapers. And people were saying that free range or pasture birds are immune to avian infection because they're outside and they have all this great immunity from the sunshine. That is a myth. And I want to make sure you know that. The truth is, all poultry are susceptible to diseases, particularly the high path avian influenza. Just because they're outside is not going to help them in any way, shape, or form. This time of year, it's probably best to keep your birds locked up or in a dedicated run, because there's really nothing out there for them to eat. The plants are dead for the winter time. There's no real bugs. The only thing that can really happen is they can catch some kind of disease from wild animals. So again, make sure that you keep your birds in a safe situation at all times. And with that, Megan, I think it's time to take some questions if we have any.